This is Skinner, recording Module 4 assignment Compare and Contrast for my Animation History online class for Rasmussen College 2017 fall quarter. I am comparing and contrasting the two Disney films Sleeping Beauty and Snow White. I rewatched them in the past few hours in order to get a better idea of how they functioned and were created, and just to see how much progress was made in the years between them. Let me start off with a small piece of Snow White just to give everybody a fresh idea here.
Now don't tell me who you are. Let me guess. I know. You're Doug.
Why, yeah, that's true.
So right off you can kind of tell the difference between these characters. Snow White is very humanoid and very direct about her movements. It's clear that it's a very human person, while Doc, the first dwarf here, is shown as a little more frumpy. He's more of a cartoonish appearing character, and I believe that's because that Snow White was created with rotoscoping. They had an actress, they filmed her, and they traced around her movements to get a better, more distinct appearance of a standard human being. While Doc here, with his movements, you saw how he was all over the place. He was more hand-drawn, a lot of squash and stretch. They wanted to give the dwarves a more kid-friendly appearance, I would think. And you could tell, let me go back really quick here.
Now don't tell me who you are.
The background is very detailed and very painted, while she's also very detailed, but you can tell that there's something different between her and the background. The blankets in her hand and right here in the bottom right corner as well. That's because of the celluloid. They drew it in layers, and they used that multi-plane camera to get a better sense of depth, because you can't really have depth on a single 2D plane, which was quite frankly a stroke of genius. But you can see almost on the outline here the mild blur they have going on. That's a side effect of the animation, and they were all self-taught, so even though it was rough, it was very, very well done. Let's watch it again and get a better sense of
Let
it.
me guess. I know.
See her-
You're Doug.
Why, yeah, that's true.
And
So again, you saw that squash and stretch with Doc, but now you also should have noticed that they are different from their backgrounds. The colors are a little brighter, and they have a little less detail, but the backgrounds, they are much more detailed, and they're very still. They don't move. And if the camera zooms in on them, you'll notice that the background's not going to move very much. It's more going to move in on the character, just that one layer, similar to, say, Photoshop or Illustrator, if you've worked with those. Now, let's switch to Sleeping Beauty. This was visually very different. Clearly, they had more experience, and they knew what they were doing. They already had gotten their feet wet. Let me show you what I mean here.
I don't know who she was. A peasant girl, I
A
suppose.
peasant girl? You're going to marry a... Why, Philip, you're joking. Isn't he? No, you can't do this to me. Give up the throne, the kingdom, for some nobody? Why, Harry, I won't have it. You're a prince, and you're going to marry a princess.
Now, Father, you're living in the past. This is the 14th century.
Nowadays, I'm still the king, and I command you to come to your senses.
And marry the girl I love.
Exactly. Good.
Very amusing. This is the 14th century. Again, backgrounds are still very detailed, but they're also much better about their characters. First of all, his father, even though he's probably not rotoscoped, judging from the pear shape of him, his movements were much more natural than the dwarves. He wasn't waving all over the place. Of course, he was shaking his hands. It was more humane. The prince, I don't remember his name, I'm going to be honest, but again, he appeared to be rotoscoped similar to Snow White right here. Realistic features and proportions, realistic movements. But you can see her face, it's almost blurry. There's not a lot of detail. They just painted it on very delicately. While here, let's take another look at the
He
prince.
didn't say it was Aurora.
You most certainly did. You said that.
I said I met the girl I was going to marry.
Very precise, very natural movements. And it's much harder to tell that it's celluloid, that these are characters on their own frame, their own layers. Even the way that they interacted with each other, that may have been a single image, but this very smooth motion of him just taking the crown out of his hand.
Some nobody. You're a prince, and you're going to marry a princess.
Now,
The way they just move around each other. I suspect that it was two different layers that they had working very close to each other, but it's entirely possible it was one. Again, none of this sort of animation would have been possible without the multi-plane camera.